The single biggest story, the biggest development in American politics since Donald Trump first descended that golden escalator at Trump Tower more than a decade ago. Donald Trump is right now, as we come on the air, at his lowest point in terms of popularity in his political life. And now more than ever, there is both a permission structure and a growing imperative to speak out against Donald Trump and his administration. A brand new poll from CNN shows Donald Trump's approval rating at just 36%. Among independents, Donald Trump's approval rating is 26%. Just 32% of all Americans think Donald Trump has the right priorities. 68%, almost 70% of all Americans say that Donald Trump is not paying attention to the most important problems they face in their lives. At this very moment, Donald Trump appears intent on proving those 68% of us right. Trump is doubling down on one of his least popular issues, the tariff regime. In the wake of the Supreme Court giving him a political get-out-of-jail-free card by striking down his tariff regime as illegal and unconstitutional, Donald Trump, snatching defeat from political victory, has announced he's going to impose a 15% global tariff. He says he's allowed to keep that in place for 150 days. In a post on Truth Social this morning, Trump threatened to use tariffs, quote, in a much more powerful and obnoxious way with legal certainty, end quote. If there's one thing Americans have said they hate, it is Donald Trump's tariffs. Americans have been consistent about that in poll after poll after poll, and those Americans include people who voted for him. The latest, a survey in the Washington Post, Ipsos, and ABC News that finds just 34% of Americans approve of Donald Trump's handling of tariffs, 64% disapprove, identical to what it was back in April. And doing nothing to help the image of an administration that is deeply out of touch, pictures emerged over the weekend of Donald Trump's hand-picked FBI director, Kash Patel, chugging beer and screaming and wearing a gold medal after the glorious U.S. men's hockey team won gold at those Olympics. Kash Patel was there on the taxpayers' dime, while the FBI faces multiple crises here at home. In the midst of all of this, Donald Trump is claiming that if you look closely, support for him still exists. It's just, quote, silent.
Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, our people, they've been incredible, the job they've done. And they take nothing but abuse, but, you know, they're sort of pretty hardened to that, I think, because they know they're doing the right thing. It just amazes me that there's not more support out there. It's just, we actually have a silent support.
Kristi Noem of self-described, I had to shoot my puppy fame. Silent support, okay. On Earth One, in reality, and increasingly on Earth Two, too, solid majorities of Americans oppose Donald Trump and his entire agenda. And those Americans are feeling braver and braver about being louder and louder. Signs of resistance to Donald Trump are now sprouting up everywhere you look in the public arena, and that is a real shift. With all eyes on Team USA, the Olympics, athlete after athlete after athlete had the courage to make themselves heard. Here's skier Chris Lillis.
I feel heartbroken about what's happened in the United States when, I'm pretty sure you're referencing ICE and some of the protests and things like that. I think that as a country, we need to focus on respecting everybody's rights and making sure that we're treating our citizens as well as anybody with love and respect. And I hope that when people look at athletes compete in the Olympics, they realize that that's the America that we're trying to represent.
In an interview released last week, Olympic gold medalist Alyssa Liu opened up about her feelings about the Trump administration.
I think it is really important also to, notice the faults in our own government. Very, very similar to my dad. Things are a little rough in our country.
A little rough in our country. Tennis star Coco Gauff also spoke out. She told reporters at a tournament in Dubai this, quote, I don't think people should be dying in the streets just for existing. It is tough to wake up and see something because I do care a lot about our country. I think people think I don't for some reason, but I do. I'm very proud to be American. You don't have to represent the entire values of what's going on in the leadership. I think there are a lot of people around that I believe in the things I believe in diversity and equality. Here at home, there is a vibrant and growing protest movement. In Minneapolis, superstar singer Brandi Carlile invited a group of activists to join her in singing a song that has become a rallying cry to the resistance to ICE and to Donald Trump's brutal immigration enforcement tactics. Watch some of that moment.
Singing Resistance. Oh, it's okay to change your mind. So what's the courage? Leave this behind. Oh, it's okay to change your mind. And you can join us here anytime. Oh, it's okay to change your mind. So what's the courage?
This rising tide of resistance to Donald Trump in every corner of American public life, from sports to entertainment to music, and growing. As Donald Trump's approval rating and standing with the American people sinks lower and lower, is where we start today. Political analyst, the former Senator Claire McCaskill is here. Also joining us, senior contributing editor Michelle Norris is back, plus political analyst and pollster Cornell Belcher is with us as well. I could talk about Brandi Carlile and the athletes for the whole hour, but let me just root myself in data. Cornell, tell me what you see in the polls.
Well, I see a sort of cratering that, frankly, Nicole, I haven't seen since we voted Donald Trump out of office several years back. All the data, and look, Nicole, something that we talked about a great deal is the middle of the electorate, where a lot of elections are won or lost. If you look at the Washington Post numbers around moderates, over 60% disapprove of his jobs, moderate voters. And that moderate swath of the electorate is where you win a lot of elections. And if you look at suburban voters, which I pay a lot of attention to it in the data, you have over 60% of suburban voters disapproving of his job overall. And then you get into the details of it around economy, around inflation, and even around immigration. These key middle of the electorate, moderate voters and suburban voters have turned hard against the president. And I think when you look at how Democrats have been overperforming for the last year in special elections and off-year elections, that you see that moderate and that sort of that moderate swath of voters, those independent voters who often determine elections along with turnout, moving solidly against the president. And I think at some point, if you're going into a midterm, Nicole, the Republicans have to try to change those numbers, because you cannot go into a midterm with these sort of numbers for your party and the top of the ticket.
Cornell, let me just go a little deeper here. So this is the difference from 1 year ago. And I think the reason I have looked and scoured the country for signs that the culture was going to lead or sort of reflect our politics is from something Joan Baez said to me. She said, we had each other and we weren't looking for politicians. And, she talked about singing with Martin, with Martin Luther King Jr. And so I started looking outside of just elected Democrats, and I started looking at the culture. And I have tracked almost daily what seems to be a ballooning, sort of a swell of this safety in numbers, which is something that you heard the people on the streets of Minneapolis talk about. How can you be out there after Renee Nicole Good was murdered? Well, because we're safer together. 17 days later, Alex Preddy is killed. And they're out there in larger numbers than after Renee Nicole Good is out there. There seems to be a mirror, if you will, happening in culture and in sports. And it was really, really clear during the Olympics that there was permission structures suggest they were waiting for approval, almost like a sort of a safety structure, if you will, that they felt safe speaking out against what's happening in the country. Is that tracked in the polls, or are the polls sort of a reflection of that? Or how do you see that correlating to the polls, Cornell?
Well, I think, and we've talked about this before, I think culture leads politics. right? What you see happening in the social spaces and in culture spaces, they actually, typically happen before you pick it up in data, and certainly before politicians start reacting to it. I think if you look at sort of the conversation that's going on, at least in the left of our political space right now, that wasn't initiated by Democratic elected officials. That was Democratic elected officials being led, right? And look, you've reported on it before, and I think it's remarkable the number of people who say that, again, they're not necessarily people who've been part of a protest before, and they're not been particularly partisan, but they got to take to the streets because of what they're seeing. And it's a values conversation. And I know so many of our Democratic friends want to say, oh, it's affordability, it's affordability. Those people aren't taken to the streets who've never taken to the streets because of affordability. It's a more values and aspirational thing that's happening. And again, you know it as well as I do, mobilizers are hope and anger and not sort of the best constructed economics argument. And I think what you see right now is a reaction to the values that so many Americans feel are being undermined by what's happening in this country, and that's far more effective than any economic argument that a Democratic consultant has come up with in the last several years.